said we had guys ready to bullpen. Garrett is our best pitcher, plain and simple. Garrett's our best pitcher, and those were his runners, and I felt he deserved to pitch his way out of it. He actually made a good pitch. That was going to be his last hitter, and he was still 94. He knew that was his last hitter. He was able to reach back, and he was 94 that entire bat. He made some great pitches. The guy took a great swing on a tough pitch, up and in on the zone. You know what? You got to tip your cap, but Garrett Gaines, our best pitcher, and he deserved to be a number one.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on this Monday, continuing to unpack another rough weekend for Gamecock baseball, falling in all three contests to the #1 Tennessee Volunteers. Our guy Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central was there to witness it all, and Jack, that was a little bit of what Coach Kingston had to say after the game on, I guess that was Friday night, talking about Garrett Gainey being left in maybe a little bit longer than he should have. And it's one of those things. I know you had to go right up about this on Gamecock Central that, you know, there's been so many issues with pitching here as of late. I get putting Gainey, or I get leaving Gainey in there from coach's perspective, but it ended up going sideways, and that just kind of ended up being a microcosm for the whole weekend when it came to pitching once again.
Yeah, first off, thank you for having me on, as always. But I will say that, you know, leaving him in was – here's the way I've looked at it, thinking back on it now. After he came into the inning with – I can't even remember how many pitches, but his pitch count was definitely getting towards the end. So you knew this was probably going to be his last inning. And the top of the order was coming up for the third time in the game. And when that usually happens, you know, the offenses tend to figure out what you're throwing a little better. And, you know, after Christian Moore, the leadoff hitter for Tennessee, has been nasty, probably should win Golden Spikes this year if Charlie Condon or Jack Caglione didn't exist. But after he hit that homer in my head, I'm like, all right, I hope someone in the bullpen's ready. And then, you know, I understand leaving him in after that. When Gainey gave up the back-to-back singles with, I think, 2 outs after that, Kingston should have pulled the plug. Easy. Bring Chris Veach in, do it. Or Jake McCoy, whatever you wanted to do there. But instead, he pays the price by leaving him in and gives up a 3-run homer. So, look, I understand it that you want to, you know, have your best pitcher get his way out of a jam, but yeah, I disagree with it wholeheartedly.
And Kingston talked about this as well on Friday. You know, we talked about going into the weekend, and there's a reason that they only listed one starter, that being Ty Good and everything else TBA, to be able to use guys in certain situations to try and come away with at least one win. So you go to later on in that game, again, McCoy comes in, gets a couple outs, does allow a couple runners on, or does allow a couple runs to pass as well. And then you have the option of bringing somebody else in out of the bullpen, and they decide to go with Parker Marlott, who ends up giving up a couple runs himself. Veach, and I know you mentioned this in your article, would have been better served in that situation, purely from an experience standpoint, as Marlott had been, or is only a freshman, and that was a 1-run game at that point in time. So you're still very much in it. It seemed like, but unfortunately they decided to go with Marlott, and things just kind of came unraveled from there.
Yeah, look, I think at that point it was a 1-run game. South Carolina's trailing 4-3. And, you know, you normally in that situation, you should be bringing, I think it was the 7th, actually, and you should be bringing Chris Veach. And, look, in these types of games, I mean, look, Kingston's reasoning for not bringing in Veach was simply the fact that he wanted to save him for the final 3 to 6 outs. What makes you think you're getting to the final 3 to 6 outs with a lead? I mean, I don't understand it, especially after the fact that Kingston decided to use Veach in a 4-0 deficit on Saturday. It confuses me. But, you know, look, I mean, Marlott's been a good pitcher this year, but as soon as he served up that grand slam, any chance of winning was out the window. So, look, I hate using this phrase, but I feel like he punted in that situation. You know, I'm sure, you know, there's some that'll disagree, but look, I mean, you use your best pitcher in a 1-run game to hold the deficit, and you go from there after that. You can't afford to save pitchers for situations where you don't know what's going to happen.
So that is now a 6-game losing streak to wrap up the regular season. They'll go to Hoover tomorrow to take on Alabama in the single elimination first round. We'll get to that in a moment. What's your evaluation of just where this team's at right now as it limps to the end of the regular season?
Yeah, things aren't too pretty right now, I'd say. You're going into Hoover on a 6-game skid, like you said, and there's a lot of reasons for that. I think Against Georgia, the pitching staff was not good at all. 39 runs given up. That's not good enough to win you a series. The offense did their job in trying to win games. I think this weekend it was kind of a reverse. I mean, outside of some obvious, struggles this weekend on the mound, I think for the most part the pitching staff did what it had to do to give you a chance. And then, the offense just 7 runs is not going to cut it. When you're batting under the Mendoza line as a team this weekend, that should speak to the struggles. And the defense was also not great this weekend. I think there's a lot of things going wrong right now, and I think the only silver lining is for this team is that I feel like, at least in my opinion, they're in good shape with their pitching staff heading into Hoover. I think it was smart to use, some guys like Eli Jones, Veach, all in these different roles for Saturday, only pitching 2 innings. So that way you save them for, the SEC tournament, and they can pitch on Tuesday. So I think the pitching staff's in good shape. It really is going to come down to who else on offense outside of Cole Messina is going to have a good week. And, I think South Carolina really needs this game versus Alabama to at least solidify their postseason hopes. I think it's still a little bit up in the air right now.
And talking to Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central, talking about that offense that did struggle over the course of the entire weekend, save for Cole Messina. What stuck out to you as the biggest issue they were having up there in Knoxville?
I think the biggest thing was that they were striking out a lot and not getting a ton of walks. Tennessee's a team that really does not give up a ton of free passes, and because of that, South Carolina really struggled. They didn't have a ton of situations where they had runners in scoring position, and when they did, they just didn't get the job done. I think plain and simple. And look, Kingston, after I think Friday's game it was, and this was mind-boggling. The fact that South Carolina had a good offensive performance despite only scoring 3 runs and only having like 5 hits. I don't see it. Those last 2 games, you didn't have a single extra base hit. I think that's kind of where the difference was this weekend. And there's a lot of things going behind it. But, when guys like Kennedy Jones, Blake Jackson don't have a single hit in the series, it makes it really tough to win.
So when you're Coach Kingston trying to give a message to this team after struggling these past couple weekends, I mean, where's the optimism? What are you pulling from to give this team some semblance of hope going into these next, or what you only know is your only guaranteed game tomorrow?
I think the only thing you can do now is, and Kingston referenced it when talking to us after Saturday's game, is that it's a new season, which he's right. I mean, the postseason's a completely different animal. You got to turn the page. Whatever you did in the regular season doesn't matter anymore. Despite going under 500 in SEC play, the only thing you can do now is move forward and try to win each and every game that you can. And I think it starts with Tuesday. I think if you win, a lot of confidence is going to be instilled in this team, regardless of what happens after Hoover. I think they just need to get a win under their belt, just for some sort of confidence sake, that sort of thing. Because this team right now really does need a win, and the best way to get out of it is getting a good performance of your pitching staff on Tuesday. I think it's going to be a combined effort, kind of like what we saw on Saturday, and then you go from there.
So looking at this Alabama matchup, they did go on the road to Tuscaloosa earlier on in the season. Did lose 2 out of those 3, picked up the win in game number 3 there. But one of the losses they did have was that 1-run loss, 4-3 on Thursday night of that series. How do you see this matchup going tomorrow?
I'm not sure. I think it was a better matchup to get Alabama again, or as opposed to getting Florida, who just took 2 out of 3 from Georgia, and I wouldn't want to be facing Florida right now. I think Florida can make a little run here, and definitely, I think they're getting to the NCAA tournament now, but definitely leave no doubt about it. For tomorrow, I don't know who's going to start. We'll talk to Mark, I think at 12:45 today, and hopefully get an answer on that. But I do expect it to be kind of a bullpen game, at least in my opinion. And then you go from there. And then I think the offense needs to get at least 4 or 5 runs. And I remember seeing Alabama back in March, and they're a good little team. They got some offense, but they just lost a series to Auburn, I believe. So we'll have to see what happens. Both teams are on the brink with a 13-17 SEC record. both are going to need it, but I do expect South Carolina to finally snap this losing streak and get the win.
Well, for this team and this fan base's sake, let's certainly hope that's the case. We'll check in with you later on the week where hopefully we're talking about some postseason aspirations with this team. Appreciate it as always, Jack.
Thanks so much, man. I always appreciate it.
Again, Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central on the road covering this team and heading out to Hoover for tomorrow's game against Alabama. First pitch for that game sometime around 2 o'clock. So you have the first game that starts at 10:30 our time, 9:30 local time out there in Hoover, and then game number 2, which is Alabama and South Carolina, will start roughly 30 minutes after that. So our pregame coverage will start at 1:15 here on the game, and then first pitch will happen whenever things are ready to go out there in Hoover. Another baseball game means yet another chance for you to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. Pot up to $1,350 right now after still no home run, or excuse me, still no Grand Slams through the entire regular season. Maybe, just maybe, they can hit one out there in Hoover tomorrow, taking on Alabama. Be time to talk some hardwood, or specifically talk about who performed the best this past weekend. Thanks to our friends over at Georgia Pacific. That is coming up next. It is the Extra Point Tower Head along with you on your Monday on the Game. As always, I love telling you about our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist. And as always, I want to remind you to always be on the lookout for things that might be going wrong around your home as far as your home's foundation. If you notice some things like cracks in your exterior brick, cracks in walls or above windows and door frames, doors, windows that might be sticking a little bit, or uneven or bouncy floors, or cracks over your garage door. If you notice any of these problems, any of them at all, you could have serious foundation issues with your home. If so, just head online to cantycanfixit.com and schedule an appointment today with a Canty Foundation Specialist professional. They'll come out to your home, evaluate what's going on with your foundation, and get it fixed up just right so you and your family can live comfortably. Again, schedule an appointment online at cantycanfixit.com for our friends at Canty Foundation Specialist. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on the game. It is time. Talk Hardwood, brought to you by our friends over at Georgia Pacific, where we highlight some of the best performances of the weekend. And unfortunately, when you're talking about getting swept by a team like Tennessee, it's hard to find some of those performances when it comes to the Gamecocks specifically. But as we've mentioned several times, Garrett Gainey, was working pretty well through most of his start, as he had done against Georgia the previous weekend. I know the final numbers don't bear that out. 5 2/3 pitch, 7 hits, 4 runs, 0 walks, and 5 strikeouts. But up until that 6th inning, things were actually going pretty well for him. And I know that's kind of a silver linings type of grab when it comes to something like this. But he's your best pitcher on the staff as of right now. There is no denying that. And I don't know how far he can get you himself. You're obviously going to need some help in the support that you have around him, but should South Carolina make a regional, I would imagine he's going to be option number 1 when it comes to deciding who your first pitcher is going to be, and then trying to figure it out after that for however many games you do end up playing. On the offensive side of things, I mean, got to show some love to Cole Messina. He was kind of the one bright spot of the weekend for this Gamecock offense that as a whole was mostly disappointing. 6 of 11 on the weekend, 1 RBI, 1 home run, that coming in game number 1 on Thursday, where he had gone 2 for 3 in that contest. He was the only Gamecock hitter to actually get a hit in all 3 games this weekend, and most of the rest of his teammates, 1 of 11, 2 of 10, 0 of 12, 2 of 10, 0 of 10, 3 of 11, 3 of 11, 2 of 9. So not a whole lot to hang your hat on this weekend from a purely offensive standpoint. Gamecocks only ended up scoring in 5 of 27 total innings of work, and only 1 of those innings, that being that second inning on Friday, produced multiple runs. So that kind of offense not going to get it done, and certainly, and here's the thing. The weekend before, for as rough as the pitching was, the Gamecock offense actually held its own and did a good job against Georgia. Unfortunately, when you give up 39 runs, it's really hard to outpace that. So I'm not as worried about the offense as a whole. And look, every offense is going to have an off weekend, and they certainly had that this past weekend. But I have, more confidence in them being able to put together some runs against a team like Alabama tomorrow, as opposed to kind of where we feel like with the, with the pitching staff as of right now. With Hoover now not even on the horizon, it's going to be here tomorrow. Quick turnaround. What is the message to the team? What does Coach Kingston tell his team coming away from another tough weekend, getting set for the first round of postseason play? Cut number 7 here, Dave. This is Coach Kingston on his message to the team coming away from the weekend.
Well, the regular season's over. The new season starts. We've shown on most days we can go toe-to-toe with anybody, but we've got to get over that hump. I've said that a lot. That was a game today in the postseason. That was 2 good teams going at it. These guys like playing together, and they're not going to back down.
The upbeat music blaring over the PA in the background just makes that really funny, because there's nothing, there's nothing happy about that conversation that Coach Kingston was having with the media in the, in the dugout after that game on Saturday. But you just have that blaring in the background, which is really, really funny. And to a point, I mean, Kingston's not wrong. You are kind of getting a fresh slate here with postseason play, and this tournament starting up there in Hoover. But at the same time, you would have loved to have put together a couple wins over the course of the past 2 weekends, at least, to have at least felt good about where you were at and solidified a spot a little bit more as far as where you're going to go in the postseason heading into Hoover. And as we've talked about, it's not a place that's treated South Carolina all that well over the years. They're one of the few teams that has never won the SEC tournament. And not that they necessarily need to go into Hoover and run the table and walk away with the trophy over the weekend. That would be great and would certainly provide for a lot of that momentum that we talk about them desperately needing to have. But that's not what they have to do this weekend. Ideally, I'd just like to see them string together a couple wins. You can win against Alabama on Tuesday, advance into the second round, maybe pick up a second win. I mean, I know that that's even asking a lot, but if you could walk away from Hoover with 2 victories heading into the NCAA tournament, I think a lot of people would feel somewhat better, not completely better, because again, you still have glaring issues when it comes to your pitching as of right now, but being able to put together a couple wins, in the SEC tournament would do something. At least move the needle back in a more positive direction, because we haven't had a whole lot of that these past couple weeks. So quick turnaround. Again, you really don't have a whole lot of time to dwell on what happened in Knoxville, because again, you're jumping right back into it. With the SEC tournament, and we'll see what happens. Again, Alabama tomorrow, a team that Carolina had played in Tuscaloosa earlier on in the season. They figured out how to win that third game on that Saturday, and that was the one that almost got away from them. They had the 9-4 lead going into that ninth inning, 9-4, 9-5 lead, I believe, and Alabama turned it on and just about clawed their way back, but South Carolina was able to walk out of there with at least one win. So you have shown the ability to beat this team in the past. Now, pitching matchups and all that kind of stuff, we'll see how all that shakes out. Again, we're going to hear from Coach Kingston, as Jack mentioned, a little bit later on in the day to kind of figure out all the specifics of that. Gainey pitched on Friday. That's a short turnaround. You did keep everybody on Saturday limited to right about 2 innings of work. So you do have some options there. Eskew, Becker, Jones, and Beach all pitched exactly 2 innings. So those guys relatively fresh. Ty Good obviously pitched on Thursday night, so theoretically he could go. Now that outing wasn't as good as you hoped it was going to be. So would he be the option you would want? I don't know. Again, a lot more questions than answers with this team, and hopefully we get some clarification on that from Coach Kingston a little bit later on in the day when he does speak to the media. And I'm not sure if he's going to be talking with Jay and Elijah on today's halftime show or not, or post-game show or not, excuse me, given the fact that they are in Hoover getting ready for the tournament coming up tomorrow. But just find a way to win. That's all I can ask. I think that's all that anybody can ask of this team right now is find a way to win at least a game or two and give people some optimism and some hope going into the NCAA tournament coming up here in a couple of weeks' time. Or not a couple weeks' time, next week specifically. Reminder, craft beer card, it is back. You can spend $30 a brewery at 12 different craft beer locations. $360 value, all yours for just $79. Go online to 1075thegame.com. Click on the Sweet Deals tab for your chance to purchase the craft beer card. We'll come back and wrap up hour number 1 in the Extra Point. A lot of you weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. Get some of your thoughts about where you're at with this baseball team right now. And spoiler alert, it's not positive, and I don't blame you for not feeling that way. Hit that coming up next. Wrap up hour number 1. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Out Head along with you here on The Game, wrapping up our number one, continuing to navigate a rough weekend that was on the diamond for Gamecock baseball. Got some of you weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-60-100. John weighs in and says it's painfully obvious something needs to happen. That is in reference to making a move from Coach Kingston at the end of this season, whenever that does, end up happening. And look, I'm not surprised to hear that, as that's kind of been a sentiment the fan base seems to have had for a while. There were a lot of people that wanted to move on from Coach Kingston after last year, which, when you make it to a super, I don't think that's grounds for doing that, especially, when you felt like you'd taken a big jump in the right direction despite injuries and all that kind of stuff last year. But this season definitely feels like you're at a little bit more of a crossroads. And look, we've talked about this plenty of times before. When you have a program that has achieved the mountaintop of success, not all that long ago, just over 10 years ago, with your national championships back to back and playing for a third one, there's a level of expectation of what a coach should have in his time, at a place like South Carolina, especially over a period of time. Now, does that mean that Coach Kingston had to come in here and win, 2 national championships in his first 7 years? It doesn't. But there should have been, in the minds of the fan base, there should be a semblance. They have the ability to get there. They have the ability to go to Omaha. They have the ability to make noise and be looked at as a serious national championship threat. And maybe this is reading too much into it, but I go back to Coach Vitello with Tennessee last week, and we played some of his audio leading into the weekend series. It was after they had beaten Belmont in last Tuesday's game, but he was asked about the motivating factors for the fan base, coming into that weekend, and making sure it was a rowdy atmosphere and all that kind of stuff. And he talked about the school year's over, the weather's nice, all these kind of things, and as reasons to why the fan base should be juiced up and excited. And the one thing he didn't mention was the fact that it's South Carolina. And again, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that kind of stuck out to me. That for a long time, when you saw South Carolina on your schedule, that is something that, one, worried you, and two, should get you, your team, and your fan base juiced up, because you're playing one of the best teams, not only in the SEC, but in the country as well. And that just does not seem to be the case anymore. I don't think other teams are afraid of South Carolina. I don't think that name on your schedule strikes fear anymore. And that's certainly an issue. And again, I'm going to reiterate, I've said this before, I'm not the person that's going to sit here and bang on the table saying, you need to make a change, you need to make a change, you need to fire this person, you need to fire that person, because that is, that's tall ask. And when you talk about firing people, that is somebody's job, that is somebody's livelihood, and I don't want to be that person to do that unless it's just there's no other options to be had here. And the reason I say that is because, again, if they go on a great run in the month of June in the postseason, then we're not having this conversation, because you're not going to move on from a coach if, let's say, they get you back to a super or something like that. Now, again, I know the regular season's not gone the way that you want it to go and all that, but all this can be, like I said, kind of swept under the rug if you go on a good postseason run. Now, is that right or wrong? I'm not here to debate that necessarily. I'm just saying that is kind of, it is what it is at this point. But I understand the fatigue that the fan base has, and I understand why so many people are calling for a change. Now, again, does that have any bearing on what ends up happening? Does Ray Tanner, scroll through Twitter and decide if he wants to keep or fire a coach? He doesn't. Now he hears Coach Tanner has a ear on what the fan base is saying and what the fan base feels about where the team is, and that certainly can play a factor. But at the end of the day, it is a business decision more than anything else, not just what the general consensus of the, what the general consensus of the coach ends up being. What they do after the season, I don't know. and I'm glad I'm not the person in charge of making that decision. But I will say that I do think if Carolina cannot find a way to win another game, that means they get bounced from the SEC tournament tomorrow against Alabama, and then should they make a regional, they lose 2 there and they're done. That happens, then I think those conversations would become very real about making a change. What that looks like, I don't know, but like I said, this team needs to find a way to win tomorrow. A couple more times in the SEC tournament, maybe, and then do something in the postseason. Because if not, those calls for change will only get louder and louder. And again, you're not wrong for thinking that. And if you think Coach Kingston needs to be gone and they need to find somebody else, that is, you're well within your right to believe that. And I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong necessarily. I just don't know if we are at that point yet. And Coach Tanner, in his tenure as AD, has, been good about giving coaches leeway. Now I'm the person, I don't like quick triggers when it comes to making changes with coaching staffs and all that kind of stuff. I do think coaches do need a chance to prove themselves and do need time, and there are circumstances that certainly certainly come into play. Now again, you have a seven season sample at this point in time to give you a good gauge of what the Kingston era is going to be at South Carolina. But again, we'll see. So I'm not trying to put the cart before the horse here, as things can certainly trend back in the other direction with a with the strong postseason run. Now, from a personal standpoint, I don't have a lot of confidence in that right now, because again, I think momentum does matter a lot in baseball, and I think that also factors into how the committee views this team and where they might end up shaking out. I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be overly negative here, but I think there is a way that this team might get left out of the postseason. Now, that seems like I don't want to say a shocking thing to say, but that seems like a little bit of a reach. But when you kind of lay it out, there are ways and scenarios this could go against South Carolina if they can't find a way to get back into the win column. I'll dive into that a little bit more in hour number 2, as D1 Baseball, I thought, had a really good, thorough explanation of these kind of scenarios and what exactly could happen, over the course of the next couple days at the SEC tournament, as Carolina is trying to find its footing, trying to find that foundation once again, and we hope they get it. I'm not sitting here hoping they lose and hope that we have to have the conversation about moving on from a coach or anything like that. I hope they figure it out, and I hope they start winning. I don't have a lot of optimism about that as of right now. So again, dive more into that in hour number 2 as we continue to unpack the weekend that was for Carolina baseball. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Monday on the Game. I'm always excited to tell you about our friends over at Twin Peaks. It is a busy month of May and a lot of things getting set to happen over the course of the next couple days here. You have conference finals in basketball tipping off at Twin Peaks coming up here in just a few days' time. You can watch all the games with wall-to-wall scenic views and a round of 29-degree draft beers with your crew, as you see who makes it through in both the East and the West. Coming up on Sunday, It is the Indy 500. You can put the pedal to the metal and drive on down to Twin Peaks for the Indy 500. Start your engines with sauce and toss wings and stay fueled for all 500 miles with 29-degree draft beers and handcrafted cocktails. A busy month of May and a busy weekend coming up with our friends over at Twin Peaks down in the Vista. Ten o'clock, welcome in. It is hour number 2 of the Extra Points Out Ahead with you here on your Monday, continuing to unpack the weekend that was for Gamecock baseball, losing all 3 to the Tennessee Volunteers. And now we have the SEC tournament set out there in Hoover. Things get kicked off tomorrow morning, 10:30. Believe all this should be on the SEC network for tomorrow. Of course, Georgia and LSU getting things kicked off. Alabama and South Carolina will play roughly 30 minutes after game number 1. Again, we'll have pregame coverage starting at 1:15 right here on the game. And Vanderbilt and Florida will follow them, and then Mississippi State and Ole Miss will wrap up day number 1. Top 4 seeds, of course, get first round buys. First round is single elimination. So all the teams that lose tomorrow, if South Carolina lose tomorrow, no more SEC tournament for them. All those 4 losers will go home. And then you would have the winner of Georgia and LSU taking on Kentucky, winner of Alabama and South Carolina taking on Arkansas, and then the winner of Vanderbilt, Florida taking on Tennessee, and finally the winner of Mississippi State and Ole Miss taking on Texas A&M on Wednesday as the double eliminations begin for the rest of the weekend. And then the SEC championship comes up on Sunday to determine this year's tournament champion. And tomorrow basically serves as a play-in round, as I mentioned, where if you lose tomorrow, you're out for the rest of the tournament. And again, we know South Carolina historically has not been good in Hoover. And again, they're one of the few teams that's never won the tournament overall as a whole. Now, I know for a fact Carolina does not need to go into the tournament and win the entire thing to secure its spot in the postseason. I do think they need to string together a win or two. I think that goes a long way. I really think tomorrow against Alabama is, in a way, a bit of a do or die. Now, I know what you're thinking, and we've talked about the metrics and the RPI and all that kind of stuff, and all those numbers do favor South Carolina. But there's a way that if they lose tomorrow, they could end up getting left out. So Carolina ends the regular season in the SEC at 13-17. We always talk about that 500 threshold. If you get to 500, then you're usually in good shape in a tough conference like the SEC. For 5 teams to be sitting at the same record, it makes things very interesting. Those 5 teams are Vanderbilt, Florida, LSU, Alabama, and South Carolina. Now, South Carolina does have the head-to-head series wins against Vanderbilt and Florida. Lost to Bama, did not play LSU. So at least for half those teams, Carolina does have the advantage there. And, you already have 6 teams with better records than that. They're already guaranteed in. But these other ones do get kind of interesting. Now, in the history of the NCAA tournament, there's never been more than 10 teams to get a bid from a single league. That is important to note here. Because, again, you got 6 that are already locked in. You got 5 with the exact same record going into tomorrow. History tells you one of those teams might get left out. And it's crazy to be having this conversation about South Carolina because 2 weeks ago, we thought for sure they were a lock. They were in position to host a regional going into the Georgia series. They were the last seed, the 16th seed, but still hosting was hosting at that point in time. But losing two straight series, and I get it. It's against 2 of the better teams in the country in Tennessee and Georgia, but still, you got to find a way to win 1 or 2 of those games to make yourself feel better and theoretically lock up your postseason spot, because that would have put them at 15-15. If they win 2 games between the 6 between Georgia and Tennessee, that would put them at 15-15. And right now, that's just, not guaranteed. I thought Mark Etheridge of D1 Baseball had a pretty good breakdown of this because, again, it's easy to look at Carolina and say, oh, well, they're high enough in the RPI. They've won 13 games in the SEC. They should be fine. Again, it's not a guarantee. All of the all 5 of those teams with the exact same record at 13-17 are top 30 in the RPI as of right now. Carolina is second among those behind Alabama. Carolina is 19th in the RPI. Problem is Carolina has the second fewest quad 1 wins of those teams with just 9. LSU has fewer. And that spells an interesting scenario for Carolina. And again, this is Mark Etheridge of D1 Baseball. I thought this point here is what creates a little bit of doubt in my mind. Again, these are the D1, the experts. These are the ones that put out the projections that have a really good sense of how these kind of things go. Etheridge said, South Carolina could have saved itself bubble drama with a win at Tennessee, but the Gamecocks were swept for the second consecutive weekend. 2 weekends ago, we projected South Carolina to host. Now we are debating if they will make the field. Now the debate to have here is how much of a factor does your last 10 games or what you've done recently, how much should that matter? It certainly should be a part of your equation. It shouldn't be the end-all be-all at the end of the day. However, we're talking about humans here. We're talking about the committee that decides who makes the NCAA tournament with these theoretical at-large spots. Your overall body of work does matter. And what Carolina has been able to do over the course of this season at times has been impressive. And again, RPI, they're 19th, right behind Alabama. But again, overall, it can be a bit questionable. And when you're looking at being 3-10 in your final 10 games, including getting swept, and let's say that they lose tomorrow against Alabama, if I'm sitting in that committee room, but because here's how I look at things in my mind. And I've never been on one of these kind of committees, so maybe I'm wrong for this. But if I'm on a committee deciding who gets to play in my tournament to play for a championship, national championship, whatever it may be, I want to put in teams that I think have a chance, right? Now, again, you have a full field of 64, so the chances of some of these mid-majors winning is a whole lot lower than some of these at-large teams that make it in from these power conferences. But still, I'm looking for a team that I feel like is going to have a chance to do something in this tournament. And I don't know if I look at South Carolina and think that right now. Now, again, should that be the end-all, be-all? It shouldn't, because what you did earlier on in the season should matter, where you have beaten good teams. Don't forget, you beat North Carolina in the midweek as well. They're another pretty solid overall team in the, fourth in the RPI. So you have wins against them. You beat Kentucky, third in the RPI. You have quality wins, but it's hard to predict how people view you. Now, again, you go into Hoover tomorrow when you beat Alabama, I think that ends this debate. Now, you're probably still not going to be a very high seed overall, and who knows where that's going to end up sending you, but at least get you in. Because at the end of the day, getting the tournament is the end all be all. You get in the tournament, and if you're a good enough team, you'll advance. If you're a bad enough team, you'll get bounced. But just getting in the tournament is kind of the bar that we're looking for as of right now. And do I think that they've done enough to get it in? I do. But if you ask me to bet a significant chunk of change on for sure that South Carolina would be in the tournament, even with a loss tomorrow, I can't confidently sit here and tell you that. Let's see here. Bill in Hartsville weighs in on the Firehouse Subs text line here, 340-46100. They lose the final 7 games of the season. They do not deserve to make the tournament. And that's where we get into this debate. And we do this all the time with like the college football playoff and stuff like that. It's best versus most deserving. Is South Carolina one of the best 64 teams in the country? Yeah, I think so. Are they one of the most deserving 64 teams in the country? That's what's really up for debate. Now, again, when you look at the body of work as a whole from the entire season, it's a good resume. But there's always going to be that recency bias, and we as humans can't help but have that, because we look at what a team is at a moment, and that in our minds usually tells us that's what this team is. Now, is that the right thing to do? It's not, but it's hard to ignore that, because the what have you done for me lately factor matters a lot. And I think that could really hurt South Carolina here. Now, again, if you found a way to win a game or two over these last 2 weekends, I don't think we're having this discussion, because I think that, for one, that gets you to that magic number of wins in the SEC. But I think that quells a little bit of that what have you done for me lately factor. Because, again, you did play 2 great opponents in Georgia and Tennessee. But But again, this is a team that, for as high up in the RPI as they are, and with all these metrics that do favor them, you would think that they wouldn't get swept in back-to-back series. So again, it's an imperfect science. Anytime you're using the human element to decide your postseason, there's always going to be inadequacies. There's always going to be things that don't, things that may apply to one team that may not apply to the other, and those kind of things. It's an imperfect science. But again, when you're talking about, 30 some odd conferences of college baseball around the country, that there's really no better way to decide it. So you are unfortunately putting your fate in the hands of a group of people to decide if you deserve to be in their tournament or not. Now, again, we know what that bar of success is to make sure that you don't have to worry about that anymore. And unfortunately, South Carolina's not gotten there. So you can help yourself a lot by winning in Hoover. I'll say that much. And I hope we're not having to have the conversation at the beginning of next week saying, well, South Carolina should have done this, should have done that, and they would have had a postseason. I really hope that's not the case. But I do worry if they can't put something together over the course of the next couple of days that they could be in danger. I'll leave it at that. And again, we'll see what happens with Alabama tomorrow. Again, first pitch, it's somewhere around 1:45 or 2. Pre-game coverage starts at 1:15. The rule of thumb typically at Hoover is about 30 minutes after game number 1. So when Georgia and LSU wrap up, about 30 minutes after that, we should see Carolina and Alabama taken to the field for their first game of the SEC tournament. What happens after that? Fingers crossed, we'll see. But, it would serve this team well to find a way to win at least one game out there in Hoover. We've been talking about baseball for over an hour now. I know. We'll get off of that. We'll loop back around to it a little bit later on. Do want to talk some college football because, believe it or not, we are now under 100 days until things kick off for week number 0. What are some things to look forward to this fall? Maybe some things you forgot about. Maybe some things that weren't at the top of your mind going through spring. We'll dive into that all coming up next. It is the Extra Point Towerhead along with you here on your Monday morning on The Game. Welcome back in. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head with you here on the game on your Monday. Happy to report we are officially 96 days away from week 0. Now, the big question is, do you count week 0? Our guy Wes Mitchell, being here at 11 o'clock with Chris Clark and myself, does not partake in week 0. This year, you get Florida State and Georgia Tech over in Ireland for the week 0 matchup on August 24th. Is it a full day of college football? It's not, but I enjoy it for the fact that we get something. I mean, and college football is the one sport where we don't have preseason. You don't have spring training. You don't have, preseason games like the NFL. The NBA season seems to never really end. So in those sports, you at least have something to kind of whet the appetite a little bit, to give you a little bit of a preview of what's to come. College football, we don't have that. We jump in with both feet at the beginning of the season, and it's on from there. So to kind of have that appetizer type weekend the weekend before, I love that. And I count it. Now, eventually what I love to see maybe just 3 or 4 significant games on that day. Sure. It kind of seems like now we get like one kind of premier matchup and then a bunch of kind of filler games around that. I think, was it Jacksonville State and UConn that played last year in week 0? I think it was. Doesn't have to be anything too crazy, but, some more games of substance I think would go a long way for week 0. Regardless, 96 days away from it, which means we're 103 days away from the start of the Gamecocks football season. Of course, kicking things off against Old Dominion on August the 31st. Let's see. Yeah, under 3 days. Just making sure. Double check my math on that one. So, yeah. With that, we're at this point of what we call talking season, where the hay's kind of in the barn for a lot of these teams as of right now, with with spring practice in the books, spring games, most of the portal movement done. We now spend the next 3 months speculating, 3 months playing the what if game and guessing and all that kind of stuff, which is fun, and I enjoy that. Makes one of the fun things about doing sports talk radio. ESPN in celebration of the 100 days a couple days ago to week number 0 put out this list of 100 different things to kind of look forward to, storylines and questions and that kind of stuff going into 2024. And one category that I thought was pretty unique on here was first time conference matchups. If there's one thing that really kind of defines what 2024 is in college football, it's a year of a really new era that we're entering with, obviously, the 12-team college football playoff, but we've never seen so much conference realignment shifting happen in 1 year. The past 10 to 12 years, we've seen a lot of movement, but they're more, that movement happens, that movement happens. A couple years later, that movement happens. It's been a lot slower pace. This past year, before the season started, we just got a chaotic amount of movement as far as realignment goes. Of course, the headliners, being the Pac-12 disappearing, save for Oregon State and Washington State. Southern Cal and UCLA already going to the Big Ten, now being joined by Washington and Oregon and those kind of teams, and you have a bunch of the other teams in the former Pac-12 heading off to the Big 12, Utah, Colorado, teams like that, and then you have SMU and Cal joining the ACC, which is still, and Stanford as well joining the ACC, which is utterly ridiculous, but it is what it is. It's funny because with all that movement happening, it almost feels like Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC is not an afterthought, but something that's kind of gotten overlooked quite a bit. not overlooked, but it happened so long ago. Now, what, 3 years ago now it was announced in the summer that it's just kind of become an accepted thing. Like, oh, yeah, Texas and Oklahoma, they're going to the SEC. Like, we haven't seen that come to fruition yet, but it already feels like it's been accepted for so long. And with those teams coming to the SEC, that creates some new, interesting conference matchups, including, and again, this is on the list of 10 first-time conference matchups for this season. You have Georgia and Texas as number one on this list, October the 19th. Got Georgia going on the road to Austin, taking on a Texas team that made it farther than they did last year, making it into the college football playoff. And both teams expected to be once again in the mix for the college football playoff. Both those teams could make the college football playoff for all we know. And this game is really interesting to me from the standpoint of what it's going to mean for the SEC regular season. Because, again, we've abandoned divisions. Divisions are no more. There's no longer East and West. If you want to make it to Atlanta to play in the SEC championship game for a shot at a first-round bye in the college football playoff, you have to have one of the top two winning percentages in the SEC. Now, I, as most people probably do, expect the two teams to be in Atlanta to either have one loss in the SEC or no losses in the SEC. So this game here, Georgia and Texas, I think goes a long way in that. And again, we're roughly, halfway through the regular season at that point in time. This could be a de facto elimination game when it comes to who makes it to Atlanta and who doesn't. Because, and you know, these paths don't, or because you only have 8 conference games, not everybody gets to play everybody. So you're going to have teams that don't play each other at the top of the list in the SEC that this could factor in. Now, yes, Georgia does play Alabama. Texas, of course, does play Georgia, so you have some crossover there for the teams that we expect to be at the top. But again, this could serve as kind of that de facto elimination game where, let's say, if Georgia goes in there and beats Texas, Georgia's undefeated, Texas has 1 loss. That means Georgia would have already beaten Alabama a little bit earlier on in the season. That if there's another undefeated team as good as Texas, if that's Texas's only loss, and there's another undefeated team in the SEC, then theoretically, not theoretically, that other team would go to the SEC championship as opposed to Texas. Now, again, with 12-team playoff, you can still make the playoff even without going to your conference championship. But that ability to play for that first round bye, that is really, really huge. That's obviously going to be a really big game coming up in October. Similarly, Ohio State and Oregon, October the 12th in Eugene. Yes, this is a Big Ten matchup. It's going to take some getting used to. That game has the air of importance in the same way because, again, Big Ten's also abandoning divisions as well, where the top 2 teams make it to the conference championship game. I think this game takes on even more importance because you have 18 teams in the Big Ten now, to where there's even less crossover. There's more. I think there's a possibility for a 5-way tie at the top of the Big Ten. I believe I read that a while back when it was announced they were going to go to 18 teams. So you have a possibility of a lot of tiebreaker scenarios here. And these 2 teams in Ohio State and Oregon were expected to be towards the top, expect to be in the mix in the college football playoff. Yes, they are both replacing some pretty key talent on both sides of the ball, but they're still expected to be really good. And this game in the middle of October, I think, could go a long way in determining who the top team in the Big Ten ends up being. Now, they could rematch in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis for all we know. There are a lot of other good teams in the Big Ten, so a lot to unpack from there. But I think that's going to be one of the premier matchups of the entire season in all of college football. And one more here that sticks out to me and made it number 10 on the list, Florida State and SMU. Now, that sounds completely ridiculous. First of all, that it's an ACC matchup, but SMU, not too bad of a team last year. They won the AAC before jumping over to the ACC. This is their first ACC game, by the way. Now, do I think Florida State is probably the better team and should win this game? I do, but I think SMU could give them some trouble, give them a run for their money. could certainly make things interesting. So again, that's just a couple of games that really stick out to me for for what are first time conference matchups. There's another theme on this list, though, in a lot of different categories that revolves around the University of Alabama. And it comes as no surprise. I think that is the biggest question mark we all have for 2024. What should Alabama fans be expecting? We'll talk about that coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Monday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour ahead along with you here on this Monday morning, talking some college football. As I said, we're in the midst of talking season now as we look ahead less than 100 days until week 0, 96 days, just over 100 days until the start of the 2024 college football season. As I mentioned in that last segment, we are on the precipice and the doorstep of change in college football. A lot of that revolving around the college football playoff. Lee on the Love Chevrolet phone line wants to talk a little bit about the college football playoff. Lee, appreciate your call. What's on your mind this morning?
I was talking a little bit about Georgia, and I was just looking at their schedule. But they opened up with Clemson, and then Texas and Alabama. I mean, they got a pretty good schedule, pretty tough schedule. But I think with the college football playoff, you're going to see more teams schedule better teams, and not many more of these mid-major teams. Because I think a win against a mid-major and then a loss against a good team, close team, will actually mean more going toward the playoffs. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you there, Lee. Appreciate the call, 803-404-6100. The quality of your resume is going to matter a lot. Now, it's always mattered in the college football playoff era, but as we get into what we're kind of expecting with this new playoff, where you have 12 teams in and theoretically 14 and maybe even 16 teams coming here in a in a couple of years' times, I think we're going to have to split hairs on some of these teams when it comes to who gets in and who gets left out. Now, actually, it's 11 teams that get in, and then one of the best group of 5 team also gets in with the way that it's currently structured. So you're talking about deciding basically between teams like 10, 11, and 12 in the college football playoff rankings to decide who gets those last couple of spots. Now, here's the thing. If you're in the SEC and you have one loss, whether you win the conference championship or not, I think you're in. If you have 2 losses in the SEC, I think you're probably in. I would eat like 3 losses. I think you're right there on the line, but I would still give you the benefit of the doubt depending on what other teams around the country have done. But Lee, you bring up an interesting point. When you're talking about splitting hairs on those resumes between an SEC team, a Big Ten team, and let's say a Big 12 team or an ACC team or something like that, I do think it's going to come down to who you decided to play in your non-conference slate. So let's use Georgia as an example here. Let's say Georgia went 9-3 this year in the regular season, and they're right there. They're 12th, 11th, something like that on the cut line for the college football playoff. Then you can say, okay, well, you played Clemson in week number 1. That is however Clemson ends up being, we don't know, but they're a ranked team they're probably going to go into the season as a ranked team. That's going to be seen as quality opponent. Got Georgia Tech at the end of the year. Now, Georgia Tech has not been a good team, but they could end up being one, and that is obviously a built-in opponent that Georgia has every single year. And your other 2 games are UMass and Tennessee Tech. So let's say Clemson ends up being a good team, Georgia Tech doesn't end up being a good team, and then Tennessee Tech and UMass, that's pretty, we kind of know what those teams are, obviously. If you're really splitting hairs on that, and let's say you beat all those teams, I think the Clemson win's going to hold a lot of weight in terms of scheduling that out of conference. You'd probably feel better if you had scheduled maybe a 3rd Power 5 team. And it doesn't have to be like a powerhouse team, but let's say you played, I don't know, just a team off the top of my head, Colorado or something like that I think Georgia would have a shot at winning. That'd be seen as a little bit more of a higher quality opponent than what you have with Tennessee Tech and UMass. And again, I'm all being theoretical here. This is just kind of, planning out in my head way down the line. But I do think there's going to be a shift as time goes on to wanting to have more of these quality opponents on your schedule for the sake of make sure you impress the committee. Now, again, there are teams, if you go undefeated, we're not going to run into a Florida State scenario again. If you go undefeated and win your conference, if you win your conference, you're in, obviously. But if you go undefeated in the regular season in Power 5 conference, you're going to be in. I don't think that is going to be any debate any longer. We don't have to worry about that. When you get into these 2 and 3 loss teams, that resume is going to matter a lot. And Lee, I do think you bring up a really good point that scheduling is going to matter and making sure you have good quality. Now, the SC does have the rule where you have to schedule at least one Power 5 opponent out of conference. Now, teams like Georgia, Florida State, South Carolina already do that, with their built-in ACC rivals. But these teams, more often than not, are taking the incentive to schedule that quality opponent outside of those teams as well to bolster that resume a little bit more. And that's exactly what Georgia did with Clemson to start the season here. I want to jump back in this list of 100 things for the upcoming college football season with under 100 days to go now. One thing that consistently is popping up on this list, in these various categories, revolves around Kalen DeBoer and Alabama. One of the biggest questions: what is he going to be like at Alabama? Some of the biggest some of the biggest matchups of the season, highlighted by number one being Georgia at Alabama. Potential Heisman candidates, Jalen Milroe being on that, coaches to watch. Again, Kalen DeBoer is on that. So much focus is going to be on the University of Alabama, as it is each and every year, in such a new way this year, because it's a new era, it's a new regime. And with Nick Saban being gone, the expectation of Alabama is not going to change. You have a fan base that is going to expect this team to be in the running for the national championship each and every year, and we don't know if Kalen DeBoer is going to be that. I think he's a very good coach. Does that mean he's going to have the same amount of success? I don't know. We have to wait and see. We've not gotten that first game of him in the SEC yet. There's a lot of people that think, hey, it's a rude awakening coming down here. Now, he did take a Washington team to the national championship, a team that talent-wise did not match up with the teams they beat in Alabama, and a team that they played in the national championship in Michigan. He's a good coach. There's no denying that. But can he keep this team in that same realm that Saban had? I don't know. And again, the Alabama fan base can expect the same thing. They know he's not Nick Saban, but that's not an excuse for suddenly becoming mediocre. And by the way, if you're mediocre at Alabama, you're not going to last very long. I don't envy Kalen DeBoer. I've said this many times. You never want to be the guy that follows the guy, because whatever you do, it's going to pale in comparison to what Nick Saban did. Now, does that mean that Kalen DeBoer can't make the team good and can't make the program successful? It doesn't. And I think he has the potential to go in there and continue to make the team a solid contender. But if he doesn't, if they slip, if they're 8-4 this year and miss the playoff and, are much better next year, that seat's going to get real hot real fast. So there's going to be this microscope around Alabama football really this entire season, really for the next couple seasons, waiting to see if the dynasty is truly over or if it's just picking up where it left off with the new man at the helm. They've still got tons of talent. They still recruited well, still brought in good talent in the transfer portal. Like, they're still doing all the right things. How much does that coach make a difference is what we're going to learn about Alabama. And it's going to be an ongoing storyline. And again, their first conference game is against Georgia. They could lose that game, and the world may seem like it's falling over in Tuscaloosa and all that kind of stuff. We're going to see. I'm very intrigued. There's a reason Saban retiring was the earth-shattering news that it was, because it changes the foundation of college football. It changes what the bar of success is. And for Kalen DeBoer, more power to him. He's taken on a daunting task, and I'm going to be very interested to see how he does indeed live up to it. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of The Extra Point. It was a interesting weekend of golf, to say the least, with everything going on with Scotty Scheffler on Friday out there at the Valhalla Golf Course. We'll get Scotty Scheffler's thoughts on what went down on Friday morning out there in Louisville, as well as recap what his weekend as a whole was like out there at the PGA Championship. That is coming up next. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday morning here in The Extra Point on The Game. Welcome back into the Extra Points Hour ahead along with you. A couple more minutes to go here before jumping into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. It was a very interesting weekend out at the Valhalla Golf Club in Louisville for the PGA Championship. Nobody was expecting the headlines to be what they were coming away from the weekend. Obviously, revolving a lot around Scottie Scheffler and what happened to him on Friday morning. After he completed his second round on Friday, Scottie Scheffler did speak to the media. Here's what he had to say about what had gone down on Friday morning.
Yeah. First of all,
Well, that was our attempt to play what Scottie Scheffler had said there. Having some trouble with our audio there, but basically to recap what Scheffler had to say, he offered condolences to the family of the vendor that had been hit by the bus that morning, which caused the traffic delay, and said that the whole situation was a misunderstanding on his part. He couldn't really comment further on that. I'm sure his legal team advised him not to, as he was, charged with multiple things, including, assaulting an officer, disobeying traffic laws, all that kind of stuff. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens next, because he does have an arraignment scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. out there in Louisville. I don't know if he's going to show up at that or not. He said he was not sure if he needed to be there for that or not, but this process is not over. We're now learning that the officer who was a detective had gotten called in to work this traffic after this fatal accident, didn't have a body cam. So, there's a lot of how they're going to decipher the details of what exactly happened. Is going to be interesting. This is not over by any means. I don't know if there's any lawsuits that could come from this, but definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with Scottie Scheffler and, the Louisville Police Department going forward. All that being said, he ended up having a pretty solid weekend overall. Now, he was one of the favorites to come in and win the PGA Championship. That did not end up happening, but he did end up tying for 8th overall. Shot 66 on Friday, did double bogey on 2 on Saturday, ended up with 73, and then shot 65, which was exactly what Xander Schauffele, the overall winner of the PGA Championship, did end up shooting in the final round. And as I mentioned, Scottie Scheffler ends up tying for 8th overall when it's all said and done. So continues to play like the best golfer in the world that he is as of right now, and didn't seem too phased by what happened. Now he's a very calm and cool guy. Doesn't really get too high, doesn't really get too low. And that's kind of the funny thing about this whole situation in terms of who this happened to. Because again, Scottie Scheffler is the most calm, really vanilla guy there is out there in golf. And when he won the Masters a couple weeks back, his second Masters in, just 3 years, we talked about, man, that's great for him. But in terms of helping golf grow, I don't think he really does a whole lot, because he's not a dynamic personality. He's not a name that grabs a lot of people's attention. Nobody's denying how great of a golfer he is. Again, he's been world number 1 for a long time for a reason, and that's all fine and well, but the game of golf needs stories. The game of golf needs interesting characters to continue to grow. And in a weird way, I almost feel like this is kind of one of those things that's always going to follow Scottie Scheffler. And, I feel like most people are kind of on his side for what we know of the situation. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what I've noticed about where people kind of stand with, the details that have emerged, at least so far. And man, if he would have won the whole thing over the weekend, that would have just been absolutely insane. But I do think this is kind of one of those things that golf might actually be able to use to their advantage. I'm not saying they need to go out there and, have them walking around in an orange jumpsuit or something like that. But, people are now interested in Scottie Scheffler. People are now aware of him to some degree more than he was when he won the Masters. Because the casual person's like, oh, that's that golfer that got arrested. Let me check him out. You know what I mean? People aren't as enthralled by, oh, he's the number 1 golfer in the world. That's cool. You know what I mean? There's something interesting about him now with this arrest situation that could be used to the leverage and advantage of Goff. I don't know if they will or not, and how you go about that, I don't know exactly, but you garnered headlines, yes, for the wrong reasons, but golf being a sport that is desperately trying to grow its fan base, trying to create that foundation of fans to help sustain the sport for years to come. I'm going to be interested to see what they do with this, if they can do anything with this, if they can build off this to, make that growth worth anything. So we will, we'll certainly see. But definitely a wild weekend for Scotty Scheffler out there in Louisville. Again, Xander Schauffele ends up winning the PGA Championship. His first major, by the way. Congratulations to him. And I imagine a lot of those guys will be walking to golf courses when feasible from now on, as a lot of guys were doing that on Friday after the Scheffler thing happened, so as not to get in any trouble themselves. Just a wild weekend all around, to say the least. But definitely an interesting headline. And again, this whole situation's not over. We'll continue to monitor it and see what happens with Scheffler and how this all gets resolved with the city of Louisville and their police department going forward. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, it is indeed the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Myself, Wes, and Chris will jump back into the baseball conversation, share some more thoughts on that, as well as talk a little bit of football. A certain Gamecock ending up on a pretty cool list heading into the 2024 season. We'll dive into all that in the 11 o'clock hour. This has been The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Monday on the Game. 11 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Chris Clark, and Wes Mitchell coming in. I hope he has a note for being late. I told Chris we need to
He's
start
into something.